Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to VPA's final webinar in its summer series on aging in place. Today's session is called Affordable Senior Housing in Downtown, Not Just a Planner's Pipe Dream. First off, thank you for attending to some sort of Zoom technical setup on your end. If you have any technical difficulties, if you can't hear me, if you can't hear the speakers, for just a little bit, just need some help with orientation, drop a question in the chat function and Darren or I will help you out. If you have any questions for the speakers, please type it in the Q&A section. And we will be taking in all your questions and addressing all the questions at the end with the Q&A session towards the end. So that's with the general setup. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Ravi Venkatraman. I'm the Professional Development Officer for VPA. I'm also the Town Planner for the Town of Richmond. And for today, we have three excellent panelists. We have Seth Leonard, who's the Managing Director of Community Development at VHFA. In his role, Seth directs the agency's multi-family rental housing lending, tax credit allocation activities, asset management, compliance, research, and community relations. And Seth's experience is extensive in this field. Prior to joining the agency, he served in the Vermont, New Hampshire USDA Office for Rural Development as the Housing Program Director, in VHFA's Single Family Housing Department and Opportunities Credit Union, and also as the mayor of the city of Winooski from 2015 through the beginning of 2019. We're also joined by Chris Hart, who is the Development Director for the Brattleboro Housing Partnership Authority, and to complete the two phases of the Melrose Terrace project. Before her concentration on this project, she served as executive director of the agency for 24 years. And the agency has had numerous achievements during her tenure, one of which she's going to highlight today during her section of the webinar, but also regarding with Melrose Terrace and with recovery after Tropical Storm Irene. And lastly, we have Steve Lotspeich, who is the Planning and Zoning Director for the Town of Waterbury, a position that he's held for the past 28 years. He's a registered landscape architect, has been in public service fields of planning and landscape architecture for a total of 37 years on the state, regional, and local level. His work encompasses almost all levels of planning, including disaster recovery, transportation planning, economic development, historic preservation, affordable housing, land use and development of parks and rec facilities, protection of natural resources. And today he'll be highlighting a project in Waterbury that focuses on aging in place and how that's really become I guess a landmark for the community. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Seth to get this webinar started.
Great, thank you, Ravi, appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well today on this increasingly fall feeling weather we're having. I'm gonna jump right into screen share in the interest of time. Pull our presentation up. If you have any issues viewing it, please let Ravi know. So today, in a few minutes, you're going to hear about some specific projects. And if you all have heard me talk, you know I love to talk about buildings and specifics, but those later speakers are the folks on the ground who work so hard to make our funding and your policies and the state policies work together to come to fruition to an actually transformational project and creating that positive community impact. So I get the fun job today to set the table a little bit, talk about what resources exist for affordable housing, how they're prioritized, And then some of the dynamics on the ground that we're experiencing today, not just for age-restricted housing, although that'll be the focus, but all housing development. You'll be able to expand some of that information out for all the types of development you're seeing in your communities. After discussing resources, I'm going to talk a little bit about the age demographics and how we're housing Vermont seniors and what approach we take at the Housing Finance Agency to look at how to approach those issues. But first, I really want to start with that bottom bullet there and what's going on in the market. As we looked at this tidal wave, we'll say figurative tidal wave, of state and federal resources for affordable housing and infrastructure via the federal pandemic aid response, which we'll talk about those different bills in a few seconds. We really moved in our state very quickly from a time of scarcity to a time of abundance. And there was so much abundance in terms of allocated funds from the recovery standpoint to affordable housing that we actually got pretty worried about the capacity of our development community to keep up. So we did some work to understand what was happening today on the ground, and I've got an hour-long presentation on this, but I just want to hit on a few quick takeaways from some of the surveying and conversations we've had with developers. And that'll tee us up a little bit to dive into today's very specific topic on the senior development side of things. So first off, no surprise to all of you, delays are a thing. When we did a survey statewide, great participation, statewide participation from the development contractor community. We found out that 88% of developers and contractors are saying their projects are delayed right now. Those delays typically spanned from 4 to 7 months. 1 to 3 months was the next big time period in terms of what folks said they were seeing in terms of delays to actual projects. But what was more disturbing is the number of people who said, we simply aren't starting projects as a result of increases to cost, concerns about permitting, and bumps along the road when it comes to materials and labor. Across the board, our respondents reported seeing a 20 to 25% increase just in the last 18 months in cost. 20 to 25% increase just in the last 18 months for cost increases. That's insane. This might be the kind of golden slide if you're looking for takeaways from what it was that was causing those delays. So this is in ranked order. We had all the developers and contractors rank the most impactful category of what was causing them delays. And you can see no big surprise from a market standpoint, material and labor cost, labor availability are big ones. But you know, our conversation here doesn't get a pass, right? Regulatory and permitting at the local level and state level did pop up a number of different times. And in both this survey and in that feedback from the development community, and also for the statewide housing cost study that we, I'll share a link to that in the chat in a little bit, that we conducted in 2020, very consistently alignment of zoning and permit policies between state and local regulatory entities is identified as one of those key bottlenecks and opportunities for improving development flow. I can't speak to a group of planners and not plug that. But this is what folks are experiencing on the ground right now when it comes to, I mean, again, highlighting material and supply, labor availability, and hard costs. When's normal going to be back? That's the big question we get a lot. It's like, should we just sit on the sidelines for a little while and wait? So break out your crystal ball and rub your forehead. When do you think normal is going to be back? 47% of our respondents said we have no idea. We're not clear. And only 4.7% of the respondents thought that things were actually normalizing already. I will say that there was an impressive 19% of respondents that thought that early 2022 might be a good bet, that they expect things to settle down and things are already trending in the right way for materials like lumber. And if steel can start to work its way there, and plastics as well, and some of the finishes that are causing massive increases, that we could see some stabilization early 2022. But if you watch the news cycle, you know things are pretty unpredictable right now. And those later time periods of mid 2022 and late 2022 each received 9.5% of respondents' votes, but not a whole lot of certainty there. So we talk about normal. What's normal actually look like from a resource perspective? So now we're going to shift from, okay, that's what's going on the ground. What do we usually have available to help build the buildings that we need to build to house Vermont's future? The 9% tax credit program this year hit an average of $330,000 per unit on a per unit basis for cost. $330,000 per unit for development cost per unit. Roughly what this graph is telling you is we have about $59 million in an average year to invest in affordable housing in our state. And that comes in the form of the 9% low-income housing tax credit program, providing about $33 million. State and local tax credit programs providing about $9 million. And the community development Brock grant program, which you all are so vital in helping get into projects, of about $3.5 million. And then other state funding and federal funding like Home and Housing Trust Fund at $12 million. So another dynamic out there in the field is that because of rents in Vermont, our developments only see about 9% of their development costs covered by debt, right? That tells you that there's just a basic financial problem when you're developing affordable housing. And it's that cost, that $330,000 per unit, we don't have rents that support that. And so debt makes up actually a very small portion of what many of our projects are able to do. And it just shows you how important it is to understand the pressure on these resources when we're looking at scarcity in a normal year. And another critical topic, I think Chris will probably talk about a little bit, and it's a lot of the traditional resources we used to develop senior housing in the past, especially in the 70s and 80s. HUD programs, for example, have shifted. The public housing authorities aren't getting the funding to do new development that they once did, and in some cases aren't getting an appropriate amount of funding to keep up with the projects that they do have. So $59 million, what does it buy us? Remember that $59 million isn't just for new construction. We're also spending that on taking care of the stock that we have. And by the way, we use perpetual affordability in Vermont. So that means we kind of take care of that building forever. It means that we can build about 1 to 200 units, depending on a number of factors, but about 1 to 200 units of housing, new housing every year on the affordable range. That's what our affordable housing resources buy us. And I think lots of media stories right now about how that's not keeping up in the need. So what's that mean for age-restricted housing? Our policies essentially end up limiting the most powerful tool, that 9% tax credit program, to doing about 1 new age-restricted or senior-focused housing project development a year. And then the rest we spend on general occupancy. And I'll get into a little bit about why we do that. I like to show this graph on the left side of your screen too today, the Qualified Allocation Plan, State Consolidated Plan, and Housing Needs Assessment, because it's really important to understand that we don't make housing policy and funding decisions in a vacuum. We do them in coordination with the state planning departments, with your regional plans, and especially with that state consolidated plan, which is the thing that tells HUD and the federal government, here's how we're going to spend money on housing in our state. And it's informed by a housing needs assessment that our organization completed in the last round for the state. It's a great read if you want more resources on it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to note that I did bring up in the beginning that this is a time of plenty, right? That last slide showed you what it's like in a typical year. We are in a time period now where we have, I hate using the word unprecedented now, but we'll use it anyway, unprecedented investment from a one-time perspective. And that's, I've got some of those acronyms spelled out, but the American Recovery Act is $64 million right now in proposed funding. And I think most of you probably followed that the governor proposed to spend $249 million of the state's recovery funding received from the federal stimulus on housing investments. The legislature put that on hold, didn't go quite that far, but still a lot of one-time resources available to help with housing. So this is a golden period, a golden time to make transformational investments. And it's a really important time that all of our permitting systems and everything, every plot of land really that can and is ripe for development and makes good sense be considered, because we are trying to move a lot of funding right now. There's a lot of opportunity out there. But going back to how we make those decisions on a regular basis, this feels like a really important thing for all of you to see how we interweave those things. What boxes are we checking? How are we doing those prioritizations? And at the very top is tenancy and service level. And without going into mind-numbing detail on exactly what we require of projects, what we're saying there is Number one, we want to see a level of services, population level service and needs being met at a project. Senior projects that we see in affordable housing typically do a pretty good job of that. And we see a great coordination. I'm sure Chris will talk a little bit later about the SASH program as a wonderful example and gold standard for that. But our policies do right now prioritize general occupancy housing. And I do want to be honest about that. And I'll talk a little bit more about why we do that. But we're very, very focused on accessibility and what we consider to be universal design. So universal accessibility for all, so that anybody can live there and can age through time in those units. Site location designations for planners, we've put a lot of stock in making sure we're following the state planning goals and developing in historic development patterns. And then another couple location items, transportation, something we pay a lot of attention to. Property remediation. We actually don't use the word blight anymore. That was misused for a long time, right, in the planning world. So we use property remediation and also infill for existing sites that have gone unused for a long period of time. We help prioritize those with a scoring process. Historic rehabs, when you have those ready to go, highly ready proceeds a big topic for you all, because the more permits a project can walk in with lined up and ready to go, and the more community support, quite frankly, that's a really big swing, even though it's one quote unquote check mark in the qualified allocation plan. And just to back up for a second, that qualified allocation plan is the thing that tells all of the development community, this is how we're going to prioritize those really scarce and powerful and tax credit resources for affordable housing. So it's basically like a playbook and a score counter for them to understand how well their project's going to do. So that's what these check marks all relate to. And we could also spend a couple hours on the qualified allocation plan if you ever want to explore that more too. So another part of this is, as you hear, we're pulling together different resources here and talking about the stacks. These are challenging projects, and often it's not just, like we said, debt and equity. This is a graph that's a couple years old, quite frankly, and it's not adjusted. It's from 2016 numbers, but it holds true today. So it's not adjusted for current numbers. But you can see the cost increases on a per unit basis the more sources we have, because you're going to hear about some projects today that in some cases had 10 or 11 different sources, different funding sources. They didn't just go down to a bank and ask us for a few tax credits. They're complicated, and in a lot of cases, they're asking you all for support in obtaining those resources. So that's, I think, a really good thing to have in the back of your minds too. So let's get to the real meat of the matter today. So that was all kind of table setting on what's going on with resources and what's going on in the development world. Vermont remains the second oldest state in the country. So there are a few places where focusing on how we house the aging population is more important than our state, right? So as we look at households headed by individuals 55 plus, and again, I'll just add that this is the way the census data, I don't want anybody who's 55 out there to feel like you're being pigeonholed into another age group, and people get sensitive about that cutoff between 62, 55. This helps a lot to use that census data, and in some cases 55 plus is the cutoff for age restricted properties. But this tells us that the issue is not going away anytime soon, right? You can see a balanced disbursement in the county by county basis from households that are 55 plus, with Chittenden County serving maybe as the predictable outlier and clearly having a big impact on that overall state percentage. So the opportunity and need is everywhere. And we'll spend a lot of time today on rental housing, in large part because it tends to be the most effective tool for housing, especially economically disadvantaged and vulnerable households. But let's not forget what a tremendous job we've done in Vermont promoting home ownership, and that we have a lot of seniors who are going to look to age in place in their homes. And that's another important aspect of resources that we need to be providing to ensure that those homes become adaptable too. So if that's what the population trending looks like, what do the actual needs look like? So we have over 17,000 eligible senior households, almost 18,000 for that are eligible for some kind of housing assistance. Meanwhile, we do not have that same balance on the other side of the non-senior households in terms of a percentage right? But the non-senior households qualifying for assistance is lower on a count basis, right? So on a percentage basis, seniors tend to have a higher degree of need for assistance with housing, but as an overall count, there's still more in the general occupancy or under 55 age group that do need assistance. So a key takeaway here is seniors tend to have lower incomes, right? And in some cases, it gets complicated by the fact that they can have higher assets, but a lot of seniors don't. So how is our state's affordable housing stock dealing with those numbers? So right now for VHFA, 57% of our affordable housing units are occupied by seniors. And 2,100 units are actually in age-restricted projects, while 1,700 are in general occupancy projects, meaning they could be occupied by non-seniors too. So the answer is that we think with continued incremental additions to the age-restricted stock, again, in the context of the resources that are available, that we're doing okay. It's not great when you see an opening like Juniper House that adds 60 or so units to the fold of senior housing, and you had 400 plus people on the wait list. That doesn't sound like we're doing a good job, but relative to all populations, we're doing a pretty good job of meeting senior needs with the available resources we have. So with the reduced pie of funding available for age-specific housing, we've turned our focus towards ensuring that the general occupancy units, again, have universal designs, are as accessible as possible. Things like making sure they have 2 elevators, or at least a elevator when possible, and are visitable, right? That people can come and go, that there's transportation available. We prioritize those things in all projects because we understand that there are going to be a lot of seniors living in general occupancy units, and we think that that's ultimately a good thing. So I said how we are doing with the lowercase we. Now let's capitalize that we, and let's see how we're doing not just at VHFA and the affordable housing stock, but this takes a broader picture outside of VHFA and just the subsidized portfolio and looks at all households with assistance, including tenant-based vouchers and privately owned housing. And again, we see that seniors are able to obtain affordable units more easily, quite frankly. That's a reality both because again, a higher percentage have lower incomes, and because as an overall population, there are more dedicated senior households or senior units available. We understand though that we're not done yet. Non-senior and senior demographic trends will eventually shift if Vermont's overall demographic trends stay on the same trajectory, and that is demographers have no choice but to say that our state's likely to continue getting older, and that the number of younger households will stagnate or decline in some areas. And that means housing seniors is going to need to continue to be a priority. This is always a chicken and egg conversation for us. There's an argument that more affordable housing for general occupancy might help shift this number and stop that trend, and maybe that's true, maybe that's possible. And then, of course, you can throw the pandemic in and say, yeah, but everything's going to change. And yeah, that's possible. But our experience has been things might change for a little while, but that we're likely to return to some of these trends, barring sort of a more global shift in the state's employment opportunities and housing opportunities for general occupancy too. And then this is just a little bit about universal by design. So we mandate universal design on all new construction projects. We like to see adaptability and accessibility. These are key philosophical tenets for us because, again, if we're as a nation reducing the amount of resources available to develop senior specific housing, we should really be focusing on making sure that our general occupancy housing are places that folks can age in place and can stay for as long as possible, and that we can serve all populations. And that's been the agency's focus over the past several years, especially. Oops. Sorry about that. So I'm going to stop my share, and that's all I got. So I think I'm handing it over next, Robbie, to Christine.
Yes, thank you, Seth. I'll hand it, like you handed over, I'll hand it over to Chris to talk more about the Red Clover project.
You're on mute.
I asked how I was doing. Somebody said you're on mute. I said, I guess I'm not doing very well. All right. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. This is the 10th anniversary of Tropical Storm Irene. I think most of you have heard about that. It was raining very hard last night in Brattleboro, and I thought that I might get a call saying we're on flood watch. We may need to evacuate Melrose. Couple of notes. The Brattleboro Housing Partnerships is a DBA of the Brattleboro Housing Authority. And I'm going to try to avoid the alphabet soup. If I fail, please let me know. Another note about housing subsidy, Seth talked about this. I just want to put out there that today, all of the housing that I will be talking about is public housing or project-based vouchers. In either case, those represent the deepest of subsidized housing and a subsidy that is intended for those of extremely low income. One thing that we always said when we had public housing was the interesting part about public housing is that you can have absolutely no income and live in our public housing. In my bio, I should have said a few things. One is that I've been involved in senior issues for over 40 years, issues of aging, housing, and health. So it's a topic that really is near and dear to my heart. The other is that I was a founding member, along with about total eight of us, of the Support and Services at Home program. Again, Seth touched on this. It's a statewide program of service coordination and nursing support, primarily in congregate settings. The program was developed and is managed by Cathedral Square. It relies on 6 designated regional housing organizations throughout Vermont. Each of these, and the Brattleboro Housing Partnership is one, is then responsible for the panels. A panel is a group of 100 residents within its total area. Our designated regional housing organization covers Windham and Windsor counties. And so we assist with establishing, maintaining, and generally assisting all the panels in both those counties. One really unusual aspect of SASH, and there are a lot, but this is that SASH is a program housed and managed by housers. And that's, it's taken a long time for some people to get around to that, but that is a very unique characteristic of SASH. So Google it if you have not learned about it, learn some more about it. Just before Tropical Storm Irene visited us, the Brattleboro Housing Partnership was about to start the funding and permitting process for a facility we called an ELF, E-L-F, an elder living facility. It was going to go on the site of a still existing 72-unit public housing development. Again, back to one of Seth's comments, and that is public housing has really suffered horribly over the last 30 years in terms of federal funding for capital improvements. And we've just never gotten the money that we needed. So we were going to demolish this particular development. It actually passed all of the HUD screening to be in a category of slated for demolition. That was in 2009, and yep, that place is still up and running. So back to the ELF, the elder living facility was not assisted living, and it was not wholly independent living. It was SASH on steroids, if you will. It had a lot of space for services, space for more nursing support. It had a dining program, a laundry service, really many things in there so that an elder could age in place for much longer than they can now under our current mix and match of facilities and home supports. So, Tropical Storm Irene came, as you know, through Vermont, and in Brattleboro, it damaged our oldest, largest, and very historic elderly and non-elderly public housing development at Melrose Terrace. These are a couple of shots of Melrose. This is the site plan for Melrose. It consisted of 17 buildings with a total of 80 one-bedroom apartments. It's all of these buildings right in here. And it has three, excuse me, somebody. No, okay. Three sides have the Whetstone Brook right along it. During the storm, Melrose was literally underwater. And after the storm, this is what the site looked like. This is the town's water line right here. And this picture is interesting. We had the back of three buildings gouged out to the extent that we could actually look underneath them and see daylight. That's how bad it was. So 60 of our 80 units suffered damage from slight to severe. Our residents suffered the trauma of seeing their last belongings and most treasured items ruined by the flooding waters. It was a really, truly horrible experience, and it was made worse by Brattleboro's historic lack of housing. We have a 1% vacancy rate on a good month. The other characteristic of Melrose is that it was built in 1966, long before the FEMA maps. And when they came out, lo and behold, all these buildings are in the mapped Whetstone Brook. And they're not out in the floodplain or 500 year or anything like that. They're right in the brook. And they did fill the brook in to build Melrose. And excuse me, the property did flood almost every year. So after this real catastrophe, the Brattleboro Housing Partnership Board and I promised that if we could repair Melrose, we needed that so our residents had a place to stay while we found and built new housing. And what we built, the whole state of Vermont, was Red Clover Commons. This opened in November of 2017. The whole state really was involved in this project, and every entity that had anything to do with development was a partner for us in this. Our development partner was Housing Vermont, which is now Evernorth. We opened Red Clover in 2017. It costs $16 million. It comprises 56,000 square feet and has 53 one-bedroom apartments and two two-bedroom apartments. 3 floors, Seth, 2 elevators. It has 3 lounges, 1 on each floor. It has a beautiful activities room, and it has a 2,000 square foot central hall, which includes this beautiful kitchen. So in effect, we built our ELF, not just, it wasn't quite the way we thought it would be, but pretty close. So some details about this development. The first is that we used an enormous number of community and resident committees and meetings in the development of Red Clover. And the most important resident committee we had was the siting committee. And that committee made the final site selection, and they picked this beautiful vacant lot, which you can see, which, no surprise, was a terrible, really terrible brownfield. But it was close to all kinds of, here's a supermarket, shopping, services, all up and down. This is the main entry from the south into Brattleboro. Wilson's Woods is a residential area. So this parcel really transitioned from commercial to residential. And then the high school was right here. A really great location, but a really awful, awful brownfield and a very difficult site to develop. This was the development. This is a sketch, obviously, of the site plan of the building. We were not able to get all 80 units on here. We got 55. And at the end, I'll share with you the second building that we're putting up. In listening to our residents, one area of really big concern was the laundry. So we ended up with a laundry on each floor and a really beautiful laundry. And it's a little bit humorous, but the residents really appreciated it. And I think that it is important in that it is a way, it just demonstrates how important it is that you listen to the people that you are doing the development for. Another area of concern for us was that given that they were making this transition from Melrose, which had this 8 acres, a spacious sort of layout, to one building, we wanted to make sure that there was a lot of light. And so we have over 150 windows in the building. And you can see here the really incredibly beautiful light that comes in. We built these bump outs, and we did them on a southeast facing side, again, so that people in this apartment could have light, and they could have a really wonderful place to sit and read or whatever they wanted. This is the back side of Red Clover. And here is the patio coming off of that central hall, the bump outs. This whole part of the building is a single loaded quarter, which means the apartments only face this way. And we were able to create this really beautiful oasis of calm in an otherwise busy commercial area. Some other things we did, we made a beautiful porch, and it is used all the time. Folks sit out here whenever the weather permits. And it also served as a really wonderful way, a natural way for Red Clover to become a really strong community. We have raised garden beds here, as you can see. Again, this is that back. This part of the building fronts on Fairground Road and is a double loaded corridor. But as you can see, this is just a really inviting, useful, and comfortable area. Another thing we did in the inside of the building, in addition to the lights, was for wayfinding, which was very important and is very important in building senior housing. We used different colors, and we used a very simple element here, which is a tack board and a shelf, and they're all used. Residents really personalize that space, and it helps in their wayfinding because not only do they have the change from a carpet to another a laminated surface, but they see this and they see their personalized tack board. So it's very helpful. We also have, for wayfinding, outside of each elevator landing area on the 3 floors, we've put a series of 4 photographs. This one, and they have a theme. So this is our Creamery Bridge in Brattleboro, and that theme is all pictures of the town. Another theme, of course, is the fall and tractors. Seth mentioned funders. I won't go into the details around it, but I will just confirm that for Red Clover, we had somewhere between 8 and 10 funders. Our pre-development costs were in excess of $500,000, and these funds were an important resource that Evernorth brought to our development. And that's, I wanted to just close up here in terms of the building by showing you Red Clover 2. This was the surface parking for Red Clover Commons. It actually has parking underneath it for all of the residents. We're starting this month to move people into Red Clover 2, 3 stories, 18 units, 1 elevator, 1 laundry, and a price of $5 million. Once we move everybody into this new building, Melrose will be closed by December of this year, and it will no longer be used for residential housing. I'm really happy to say that we will have made good on that promise. I wanted to talk about the role of the town planning office in all of this. Suffice it to say, it was essential, and the planners were incredibly helpful. The first building, which is this one, Red Clover, we had to bring through a very old plan unit development process, brought us to the planners and the select board a few times. We also had to go through the Act 250 criteria that is reviewed by the Development Review Board, and that was actually very helpful for us. When we began looking for the second building, we found that a new zoning bylaw had inadvertently restricted the density of every open lot that we looked at. And it was a terrible unintended consequence of the new zoning. The town staff acted very quickly, but you're all planners, you know how long it takes to get a zoning bylaw changed. So what the planners did was help us figure out this is a planned unit development. They helped us figure out how to put more density on it and stay within all of the zoning regulations. The other really great thing that happened as a result of Red Clover is that this yellowish brown area is a new zoning district, and the planners created it with Red Clover as its anchor. So I was, as somebody who started out in planning, I was really thrilled that our development set up a new zoning district and was seen as its anchor. I know in closing that you are facing very, very tough times, and Seth certainly ran through the amount of money that's come in and the amount of projects that people are trying to do. The present push to get new developments approved at a fast and almost overwhelming pace is incredible. And yet as the planners, you need to be thinking of the long-range planning needs for your community. And that will include, as Seth said, an ever-aging population. So thank you for letting me go through this. Thank you for letting me share Red Clover and Melrose. I applaud the work that you do and want to thank you for your really essential service to our wise and well done land use in Vermont. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Great presentation. And I'll hand it over to Steve, talk about Waterbury.
Okay, well, thanks, Chris. That was great, a great success story, great, the many success stories from Tropical Storm Irene. That's good to see and shows how long the recovery has taken. So I'm going to share my screen and share about a downtown project. And let me just see, I think I've got the wrong one here. Just hold on a second. Hold on, got to get the right screen share. Here we go. Okay, that looks better. All right, everybody see my screen all right? So I'm going to talk about a building right in the heart of downtown Waterbury. Many of you who come to Waterbury are probably familiar with it. It's the Stimson Graves building, and it's on Stowe Street, just off of North and South Main Street. And it was recently renovated. It was, it's a 30-year-old project, and started in 1991. And so I'm going to go through some of the history and talk about the project's relation to our downtown. Here's a few of the residents sitting on under the awnings on the sidewalk, and the elderly gentleman with the hat actually worked on this building. I interviewed him for wage rate compliance, and not only this project, but another project in our industrial park. So it shows you how people in the community stay and take advantage of the senior housing. So this building has our senior center. It has 12 senior apartments. It has an office for programs such as SASH to use, visiting nurses and so on. And then it has a commercial space that I'll talk about a little bit later that's now a pottery studio and gallery. So I'm going to try to move right along here. Mentioned that this is in the heart of our downtown. The shot on the right shows the corner of Stowe Street and Bidwell Lane with the Stimson Graves building in the background. These interpretive exhibits just went up as part of our Main Street reconstruction project, another project that I've worked on in my entire career here in Waterbury of 28 years. So this is in the heart of our historic district, and the Stimson Graves building is an historic building built in the 19th century, and talk a little bit more about that aspect as well. So it's been part of our revitalization program, which at this point is at its 30th anniversary, and also a big part of the recovery from Tropical Storm Irene that really jump-started getting our Main Street reconstruction and reconstruction of Stowe Street accomplished, and that was just finished last week. Here's a picture of Stowe Street looking towards North and South Main Street, taken at the turn of the 19th century, moving into the 20th century, and before the advent of the automobile. The Stimson Graves building is the second building on the right, and the building before that was the Waterbury Opera House. So this was really the heart of the cultural center of Waterbury and continues to be. This is the view looking from Main Street, looking the other direction. And so shows the Stimson Graves building on the left, and this is from the 1930s. And the space at this end of the building was the Knights of Columbus Hall, and the dance hall was on the second floor, existed right up until the time the building was renovated in the early 1990s. The project was a partnership. It was initiated by an organization called Revitalizing Waterbury. They're now our downtown organization, and they started as an organization with saving this building. The owner of the neighboring gas station, the Gulf Station, planned on demolishing the building and building a car wash right in the heart of our downtown. And Revitalizing Waterbury, with some very quick gymnastics, got the support of our village trustees, Village of Waterbury trustees, obtained funding through a revolving loan fund that we'd established from an urban development action grant that was loaned to Ben and Jerry's to build their plant in Waterbury. And then the repayment created a revolving loan fund. So it was local funds which saved this building. And it was purchased in 1991. When I started in 93, my first job was administering the CDBG grant, Community Development Block Grant, that helped fund this project. That was over a $500,000 CDBG grant. So Revitalizing Waterbury took on this tagline of miracles happen, and they owned the building up until about 10 years ago. It's now owned by Downstreet Housing and Community Development. So here's a view from the Main Street end of the building. I mentioned it was recently renovated. The initial cost of the project was between $2.2 and $2.3 million. It had about 10 funding sources, typical of the day. And just over the past year, the building has been renovated for energy efficiency. It's been repainted. I'm proud to say it's not gray. It seems like lots of affordable housing projects these days are gray, including one, our newest one in Waterbury, but it's this beautiful combination of colors. More, it's an Italianate building, so they're more in the style of that era. So the first space that you see on the left is the Pottery Gallery and Art Studio. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. So the renovation project, interestingly enough, cost a little more than the initial construction. It was a $2.4 million project. And again, it required, I think, between 8 and 10 funding sources. So that just tells that story, how you've got to have this complicated pie of funding to get these projects accomplished. And that also included, I believe, some funding through our local revolving loan fund. So the building has new windows on the second and third floor, and added insulation. And there were some interior renovations that shows you a renovated kitchen in one of the apartments that's all ready to be reoccupied. This is one of the 12 senior apartments. They're dedicated entirely to people of low and moderate income. Here's the senior center. The senior center is run by a local nonprofit, the Waterbury Area Senior Center, and it is dedicated to serving seniors, though anyone is welcome to come and pay a few dollars to have lunch. And they do serve lunch in the dining room now. You know, they've gotten to the point where you have to prove vaccination, but you can come and have lunch. And this was a senior center holiday party in 2018. I want to talk a little bit about the services. This is a facility that really provides a full range of activities and services for senior citizens and others. This is a table full of free food and crafts that are made available to senior citizens. The bulletin board shows you some of the events that are occurring. They do trivia, they do bingo, and other games. They also have classes, strength conditioning classes, health-oriented programs that are very helpful, and other health services that I believe SASH, the support services at home, provides. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the other services. I mentioned the lunch, but they also take care of Meals on Wheels. So this is the staff, the kitchen staff, long-term kitchen staff, and one of the volunteer drivers for the Meals on Wheels program. And they'll deliver up to 200 meals a day. And so they're providing services to seniors out in the Waterbury area community. And of course, this was especially important during COVID. The kitchen is really cramped for the amount of services they provide. They also provide free meals for kids in the summer through our recreation program. The meals are taken out to park sites, and that fills a gap that the schools can't provide or don't provide in the summer for kids who are in need of food to keep them from getting hungry. So I'll talk a little bit about the gallery and studio space. This is one of our local ceramic artists, Tabitha Henry, very, very talented. She's been in our community for many years in another space. This space became available. It was an antique store. The proprietor of the antique store became very elderly, and that store ultimately closed and became available. So Tabitha leased it. As I mentioned, this building is now owned by Down Street Housing and Community Development. And they were one of the original partners when they were Central Vermont Community Land Trust doing housing projects. They've been a partner in all three of our affordable housing projects that I've helped develop in Waterbury. And they teamed initially with Housing Vermont, which is now merged to become Evernorth. And so Down Street is the manager of the building, so they lease this space to Tabitha. So there's really an economic development component to this building. It was conceived from the get-go to have this component. There's been a health food store, mentioned the antique store. There have been a number of different businesses in this space over the years, and it's been a real successful anchor right at the in the heart of the downtown. So this is her studio space. It's right behind that gallery. She slip casts porcelain, beautiful, beautiful stuff, does lamps and all kinds of different porcelain, has her kiln in here. So this is an almost brand new facility that went through our zoning processes, craft production, and retail gallery space. So this is my last slide. Volunteers, of course, are a critical part of the operation of any senior facility, and this one is no exception. This is a group of the volunteers who help out, and they're getting some kudos from our cook. So I think in closing, just wanted to mention a few we've got a little bit of time here, a little bit about zoning. And I'm the planning and zoning director for what's now just the town of Waterbury. The village of Waterbury is no longer, it's now just part of the town. And we're currently working on developing unified development bylaws. We just, back in April, we passed interim zoning bylaws for our downtown zoning district, including this building. There's no limit on density. It's basically what a site will handle. There are no setback requirements. There are limitations on certain uses in terms of light industry. We do allow brew pubs in the downtown, some light industry. So it's really geared to mixed use, and probably the density side of it is important. And we're looking at the entire village area to try to figure out how we can promote density. And we're looking at a fourth project right now with Downstreet. We've been touring sites with them to see if we can develop a fourth project. The three we've done so far have been historic preservation projects, and one in Waterbury Center, two in downtown Waterbury. But this was the first one. It's been a great ride. And I thank you very much. And I think we'll pass it back to Ravi. I'll stop my share at this point and believe we're going to entertain some questions.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so let's entertain some questions for all of you. And I think the first question is sort of I guess a general question that I think Seth might have answered a little bit in the chat, but I think this attendee was trying to get a better way to understand different opportunities and tools to capitalize on funding. And I think that I was wondering in this case too, if you knew of any databases, any like white papers, any sort of resources like that, that just goes over all the possible funding opportunities for these types of projects in a more, I guess, condensed way that's all in one source.
The short answer to that is no. But in seriousness, if you have a second, I encourage you to Google Brookings Institute Rural Development. It's got a tremendous little chart. Brookings Institute did an analysis of all the different resources available for communities to invest in housing and community development. And it is terrifying. There's this chart with all these lines running everywhere with the multiple sources. But what you have is a bunch of people who are really happy and willing to come and have those conversations. So for example, I'll put my email in the chat. And if you want a resource specific conversation and you give a little bit more detail. So for example, I'm liable to bring somebody like Ben Doyle from the Housing Preservation Trust along with me, or if we're talking about water, wastewater, I'll grab somebody from A&R DC to come with us. We do that a lot, where we go to communities and say, okay, you've got a package that's probably not just a housing investment issue, it's not just an infrastructure investment issue, you're looking at all those things and how can we tie those threads together. So I wish there was like a really nice condensed guide. But I think the twists and turns with what's needed for each community and each development just makes it such that it's not an easy thing to do. So I'll put my contact information in the chat and welcome any kind of specific conversations. And also just if you want a broad overview about the financial tools available in the state for affordable housing, happy to do that as well.
Great, thanks, Seth. And I think another question that was posed that Chris slightly touched upon that you also addressed too, Seth, with the Zoning for Great Neighborhoods initiative, was about a recommendation that specifically targets increasing senior housing in historic downtowns. I think, Steve, you might be able to talk about this with the ongoing Unified Development Ordinance reforms that are going on in Waterbury.
Sure, I'll try to. So I think zoning is an excellent place to start with downtowns, and we recently ran up against some roadblocks in economic development with our bylaws, which were quite outdated. And so the state is a great resource for assistance with updating bylaws, as are the regional planning commissions. So our planning commission has been working both. We got a municipal planning grant to do the initial draft of our unified development bylaw and worked with a consultant on that. But with the follow-up to implement and phase in those unified development bylaws, we've been working in partnership with both the state Department of Housing and Community Affairs with Jake Hemmerich, who published a great, or was a part of a team that did the Great Neighborhoods program and their publication, and enabling better neighborhoods. So I think I'm really speaking from a zoning perspective, but I think it's important if a group is looking to develop in the downtown to really start meeting with the local municipality and build support there, and also partner with local organization. I think the partnerships are important, and that can play into funding too. Our UDAG revolving loan fund is very robust. It was created at a time when the interest rate was something significant. So that loan to Ben and Jerry's turned into like a $2 million fund. So it's important to, when you're looking at funding sources, to think about local resources, whether they're municipal or whether they're through the non-profit community. I hope that's answered the question.
Yeah, I think it kind of ties into Seth's response of that these are context-specific solutions that we're looking for. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and that we should be consulting with the state to make sure that what we're doing aligns with their goals and their initiatives, along with keeping a close tie with the people, the community, to make sure that we are creating solutions that best fit the character of the area. And it's always tricky.
Can I just jump in and just add one plug here, and that is from a development standpoint, you also want to be really mindful of the commitments you're making with the funding. Funding does not come without strings, and it's very important that you're communicating with the organization that's going to be managing this project when it's done, so that they understand what the commitments are that you've made, be they limits on income, services, marketing, whatever. But there are strings to the funding, and you need to make sure that you are prepared, or whoever is going to be the managing partner or property manager is prepared to meet those requirements.
Rob, if I could just keep pulling that thread, I think what's so critical about the work that you all do is the worst thing that can happen to a developer is for a project to be considered in a vacuum, and that project then shoulders all of the community's conversations about housing, affordable housing, and population dynamics. In our perfect world, our investments go into communities that have started off by having a housing commission, that have completed a housing needs assessment and had some of those community conversations about where data is pointing them, making informed decisions about their sort of strategy around housing and what the community feels at large they need to add in terms of a housing mix. And then that starts to leak into, okay, well then what zoning changes do we need to make? I talked with a planner who they had form-based code kind of go down in flames. And as they looked back at it, their reflection was, we just were too top down. We sat in our offices and came up with what we thought was this really great idea. But when we rolled it out to the community, there hadn't been enough baseline discussion underneath it to have everybody on board with understanding what it was going to look like. Developers face the same problem. When you bring a pretty picture of a building in to a development review board, it can be terrifying if the community then uses that as a vehicle to have those kinds of big conversations and use that specific project as a sounding board for it. So we're so reliant on you all. And we, quite frankly, we provide a lot of support to housing commissions around the state, including helping people conduct housing needs assessments and giving a guide to how to do that. It doesn't need to be a complicated thing that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. It can be a pretty simple exercise. Housingdata.org is a great place to try to get your arms wrapped around what the needs are and what opportunities exist in your communities too.
Thanks. One question that I had for all of you is that based on my experience working in a community that incentivized affordable housing development and really indirectly lifted the density requirements for affordable housing, senior housing development, that had a lot of great housing projects that had come through versus working in a different community that doesn't have like hard curbs on density that is, I would characterize more NIMBY. Whether you had any tips and strategies that would nudge community members into developing more affordable senior housing units and how you would approach those conversations.
Very carefully. When we began looking at this brownfield site that was where we put Red Clover, I went to the residential street that's behind it and went to every single house with information, introduced myself, this is what we're doing. And I can't tell you how many people said, oh, great, subsidized housing, there's going to be drugs, there's going to be this, there's going to be that. I said, yeah, they're going to be like 55 elderly people and people with disabilities living next door. I really don't think they're going to be pushing drugs. You know, I just don't. But it is true, and it is a big deal and a reality in all of our communities, that NIMBYism. And I think that Seth's comment, and certainly one thing that I stressed, I hope, is community conversations. You just can't have enough about housing in a community. And you have to have it with a lot of different people. Brattleboro is pretty diverse. And if you go to the landlord meeting, you have one set of conversations. And if you go to a different meeting, you have another set of conversations. And it has been very difficult in Brattleboro to get all of those people in the same room and not have an explosion. Housing is a very emotional topic. And if there's a way to take that emotion out of it, I haven't figured that out yet. But when I do, I'm going to write a book. But so I would just say continue to have the conversations and have them in every setting that you can possibly have them, and keep bringing people together around it.
Yeah, I'll just add an anecdote, and Seth, if you have something, that'd be great. So the second project we did was in Waterbury Center. It was the seminary building, and this project did run into some resistance in Waterbury Center. It's in Waterbury Center Village, and the local store owner, where we'd all go with our kids to get candy, and they had the lunch counter with the highway crew coming in at lunchtime and everything. The owner of the store was very resistant to this 16-unit project, even though it included the town branch of the library and so on. And I think the one-on-one conversations are as important as the public meetings. I think public meetings can often be lightning rods. And so it was a success story in the end. The owner of the store, who is a very conservative person, ultimately was very in support of the project. It was within walking distance of his store, and the residents, became customers. But and I think the other part of community acceptance is good management after the projects are constructed, and that's where partnership is so essential. I mentioned all three of our buildings are housing locations are owned and operated by Down Street Housing and Community Development, and they have a lot of experience. And when there are problems, and there will be issues sometimes with whether it's drug related or some other, somebody's got their car jacked up and they're, doing mechanical work in the parking lot, it's not too acceptable to the neighbors. It's really important to have management that people really understand how to work with residents and keep things in good order, keep the buildings well maintained. So, and that can help once another project comes along, but it's not easy to put these projects together or build consensus.
And I would say too that one thing that happens when these types of decisions move into the public sphere is people have ideas or notions, perceptions about what type of housing they want to see in their community that again isn't founded by data. We can't simultaneously say as a state that we want to be more diverse, that we want to get younger in some cases. We can't say that and then go about building barriers to building housing that allows that to happen and allows that to be a reality. So I would also urge that any kind of categorization of the type of housing that can get built is automatically negative to us. Housing, period, is what we want to see. And bonuses for affordable housing in general, great. But when it gets more specific than that, that's where we move into dangerous territory. And so pushing back against concepts that, for example, in the affordable housing stock in Vermont, we're not done with our analysis, but it's about 64% of eligible households that can work from an age perspective have earned income. They are working. So to say that there's affordable housing and there's workforce housing, that's a myth. Workforce housing is a misused word. It doesn't, that's not a thing. People living in affordable housing are working in the majority of cases. And then on a similar note too, when it comes to passing projects, we do have communities that feel like it's easier to get some types of projects through than others, and they start to build policies that deliberately call that out. And that's just challenging and problematic. And that's where I hope we can all sort of defend with data and information, what the reality is on the ground versus people's preconceived notions.
Great, thanks. And one question that we received in the chat was from an attendee whose town still uses density and lot size as a zoning strategy. Barrier to change is concern over school capacity. And they wonder if your communities that you've worked with, have had similar issues in the past. I'm not sure if those same issues are now a problem in Vermont, but I'm sure it was in the past, and how they overcame that.
Robbie, I missed part of the question. It was one of the words didn't come through. And what was it specifically about the density that was an issue?
The concern was school capacity.
School capacity?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I can say conclusively that most communities do not have a school capacity issue with the aging population. Yeah. I think it's very unusual. Whenever that question comes up through conditional use review, whenever projects are referred to the school board, school capacity is not an issue. Most schools are, I won't say they're begging for students, but it's not really an issue.
Yeah, I think in Vermont, we haven't really had that issue in the last 10, 15 years. But I think that I'm sure in your experience, this might have been an issue in the past, and what those conversations were about and how you went about resolving those conversations is, I think, what they're looking for.
I don't think I think capacity sometimes is used as a smokescreen to say we don't want lower income residents in the town, and they're a burden to our school, and that's what I've seen. And to some extent that may be true, but it is public education. We are committed to it, and I think that our lower income populations are just entitled to a good education as anybody else. But I have seen capacity brought up as a way to say the impact on the school is going to be with its resources and that element coming into the public schools. It's hard to justify it, but I think it's a reality.
Yeah, that's somebody who lives in and used to be part of the policy-making decisions in the most diverse community in the state with the highest percentage of students receiving free or subsidized lunches. I can say it's definitely a nerve that gets hit. And I think select boards and planning entities under communicate with school districts, just to be blunt.
Oh,
and
yeah.
we spent a lot of time in Winooski, just to use our example for what that's worth, talking to the school about how they talk about the way the school budget works and how the number of students impacts the school budget. If you want a good third-party speaker, Paul Sillo from the Public Assets Institute is a great person to break that down. He wrote most of that while he was the legislator and chair of Ways and Means, represented Hardwick for a long time in the legislature. But providing people with the actual numbers about how when students come in, and it's nothing but a good thing, regardless of what income range they're coming in, it is nothing but a good thing for your school system. And that's just math. Like there's math that tells you that it's not a perceived thing. So we worked, I know, really hard on the Winooski side to kick that door down by coordinating presentations with the school board to say, you know, we need to be encouraging housing and opportunities to keep our community affordable, and we need your help in explaining that back to the population, and that was successful ultimately.
Great, thank you. And I think that about wraps it up in terms of the Q&A and also with this webinar. So thank you, all of you, for attending, and thanks, Seth, Chris, and Steve, for your presentations. They were all fantastic. I will say that to the attendees that one thing that I didn't bring up at the beginning is that this webinar is eligible for 1.5 AICPE credits. You still have an opportunity to log it into your CM log. The link, I believe, is in the email, but if you're unable to find that link, feel free to shoot me an email, and I can troubleshoot from there. Otherwise, hope everyone has a great. Oh,
may I add
yes.
one thing? I saw in the chat that somebody wanted to come and visit Red Clover. And I just would say to everybody that's attending, if you're passing by Brattleboro, the first 3 exits or the last 3 exits in Vermont, I'm happy to give a tour. It's a beautiful building, and I think as I said before, the entire state built that building, and we should all be very, very proud of Vermont. So come and visit. Sorry, Red.
Thanks, Chris.
Robbie, we should also mention that this webinar has been recorded, and we're going to make the recording available. So people who maybe weren't able to attend or others who are interested will have access to the webinar.
Yep, thank you. The webinar recording should be up sometime next week, and I'll be sending out that email to all the attendees. And it is an open link, so you can send this out to all your planning commissions or housing committees or any other boards and committees who would be interested in learning more about this topic. And I think on that note, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and a great long weekend. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks for the work you do. We appreciate you.